Okay, let's get started. This is our final shiur on the Haftorah of Tisha B'Av, which is in Yirmiyah Perek Ches and Tes, and we've been working on it for the past 2 days. After this, we'll be back after Shabbos on Sunday and Monday, at the very least, to do the Haftorah of Shabbos Nachamu. So we'll end on a high note, much as the Haftorahs themselves try to end on a high note whenever possible. We try not to end with tragedy and doom and gloom. But we're going to see tonight, as we wrap up the Haftorah of Tisha B'Av, that there's really no happy ending. There's a little bit of advice. There's a hint of a glimmer of Yeshua somewhere in the far future. But the Churban and the Meis Mutal Lefanav, as they say, are too immediate. And again, for anybody who's just tuning in, a small blonde head and a little bit of noise may occur. My grandson is with me tonight. And he has a lot to say. So, we begin where we left off. There he is. With Pasuk Yud Aleph. We're in Perek Tes, Pasuk Yud Aleph. And we have just said that the entire country of Eretz Yisrael is in shambles. Everything is deserted. Nobody's living there. No little children are showing up on the streets. Although we know that in the great prophecy of Zechariah, he prophesied that there would be Churban, and then eventually there would be children and elders on the streets of Yerushalayim, which I have to say, having been there for Shabbosim, has come true. I was going down the big hill on Rehov Strauss, and just all these kids riding in wagons and scooters up and down the hill. It's an inspiring thing after everything that we had learned about Eicha last year. So now the Navi says, Mi ha'esh ha'chacham v'yavein ezos. Who is a man who is so wise that he can understand this? And we could say this for our time too, considering all the great tragedies that Klal Yisrael has been through, the Holocaust, the endless wars, the bloodshed, 1.5 million children, Nebuch killed by the Nazis in World War II. Even a wise man can't explain these things. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees the plan. V'asher diber fi Hashem elav v'yagida. Who is the Navi to whom the mouth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu has spoken, giving a nevuah about this kind of terrible suffering in the Churban? And then v'yagida, and he can pass it along to the people to explain. Anytime you hear anybody say that they know why the Holocaust happened, they don't know. It is beyond human comprehension and human ken to be able to explain something as huge as the Holocaust, the Inquisition, the pogroms. Oh, you turned on the lights. Yes. For those of you just tuning in, my grandson is with me tonight with Yeshaya, and he's going to be giving his own unique brand of help. So you may see a little blonde head coming in this corner of my box now and then. And so nobody can explain all of this. And Alma Avda Haaretz. And that's a beautiful phrase. It's brought up in the Gemara as well. Why is the land ruined? Why was the land lost? We say it in Eicha also. Nitzasach hamidbar mibli over. And the land is withered and dried out and blasted and burnt and wasted without anyone even passing through. Who can explain any of this? And the Chazal bring down in the Gemara, Gemara Nedarim, Daf Pei Aleph, Gemara Bab Metzia, Daf Pei Hey, and the Shaila was asked to the Chachamim, the Nevi'im, and the Malachim, the angels, and none of them could have explained why all of these tragedies occurred, why all of this terrible retribution was taken by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Granted, we did Averos, but could we have done Averos? Did the children who die in the Holocaust do Averos? How can we understand it? So Hashem has to answer himself, because nobody else can answer it. Yud Beis Vayomer Hashem, Al Azvam Es Torasi. Almost an exact phrase is paralleled in Eicha as well. I don't remember which parak. I'm thinking 5th parak, but I could be wrong. We'll have to look back at last year's videos to be able to find out. But it's because they abandoned my Torah, Asher Nosati Lifneihem, that I had placed before them. V'lo shamu v'koli. And they didn't listen to my voice. V'lo holchuva. And they didn't follow the path that I had set for them. It's that simple. We deviated from everything HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us to do. We are a people with a special mission. We are Klal Yisrael. Hashem is Kadosh Yisrael. But we have responsibilities, and if we don't listen and we don't follow, we don't hearken, we don't pay attention. So it's really difficult. Rabbi Yehuda says in the Gemara that even those who were learning weren't paying attention to what they were learning, which made it more lip service along the lines of everything we've been discussing the last couple of days. Lip service is always the worst. Hypocrisy is always the worst. And furthermore, not only did we not listen to Hashem, Yud Gimel Vayelchu Acharei Shri Rus Libam, but look what we did instead. They followed the view of their own heart, Sharirus Libam, the wildness of their own heart. They had wild desires. They had wild behavior, which only begets more wildness, and which shows you don't want an ol malchus over you. You don't want to have a yoke that ties you down. You want to behave any way you want to. The Wild West, like the internet. And after the Baalim, idols, which their forefathers taught them. So not only did our fathers not teach us Torah, but we saw our wicked generations before the Churban worshiping idols, and we wanted to be just like them. Like that horrible and wonderful song, The Cat's in the Cradle. I'm going to grow up, I'm going to be just like you, Dad. And of course, then you become an absentee dad, you're not paying attention to your kid, and then when you want your kid, but I've long since retired, my son's moved away, and I called him up just the other day, and he doesn't want to come see me. Well, that's what you get when that's the field that you plow, when that's the way you tend your relationships. And we abandoned HaKadosh Baruch Hu and went after Hevel Asher Lo Yoilu, we said yesterday. Lochein, therefore, Ko Omar Hashem. And this Lochein is not a good Lochein. Therefore, because of our terrible behavior, because Hashem had told us what to do and we ignored him, because we followed the wicked generations instead of the righteous generations, as a result, Hashem says, Tzivakos Elokei Yisrael, the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel. Because he's the God of Israel, he can't just let this go. Hineni ma'achilam es ha'am hazeh la'ana. I am going to feed them, this people, wormwood, bitter grass, Rashi says, poison. There are stories during the famine of the Churban of people trying to eat anything they could get their hands on. Similar thing happened in Jamestown, Virginia. I teach it every year to my students, that there was a year called the starving time, when there was nothing for people to eat. And out of 500 people, only 60 survived that winter. And there's evidence archaeologically that they tried to eat mushrooms and even grass to survive. Well, I'm going to feed them bitter herbs, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Hishki Sim Mei Rosh, and I will give them to drink poisonous waters. Before, we drank poisonous waters that we ourselves wanted to drink. But now Hashem is going to feed us poison, snake venom, poisonous plants. Why? Because we are being punished. V'hafitzo sim bagoyim, Tesvav. I will scatter them among the nations. Ufaratzta yamav akedma tzafon vanegba. That's when Avraham Avinu is spreading out in a positive way, where we have generations filling up Eretz Yisrael. But this hafitza is going to be a scattering where there's no coming back from it. Asher lo yadu hema va'avosam, among nations that they had never heard of, they or their forefathers. The empire of Babylon only lasted 80 to 100 years. Before Chizkiah, nobody had ever heard of Bavel. It was a minute, far-away, powerless nation. But ultimately, this nation would send us into captivity and wreck the Beis HaMikdash and destroy Judaism in Eretz Yisrael for 70 years. V'shilachti achareihem es hacherev. And furthermore, I will send after them the sword, ad kalosi osam, until I have destroyed them all, until I have consumed them all. Sorry. No, I'm just closing the part. So, sorry about that. I wasn't sure if you could concentrate, if I couldn't concentrate, so I just closed the door part way. And we're back. Come on in. Come say hello.
No.
No, you don't want to see yourself on the picture?
No.
No? Okay. He's had a day full of no today. So he's just turned 2 a week ago, and no is a new wonderful addition to his vocabulary. So until I destroy you, until you're completely destroyed, the Chereb is going to follow you. And we said already, and if you go back to the Tochacha in Kisavo, where it says that when you are virtuous, when you are good, no, it's fine. He's trying to test how far he can go before he sees himself on the camera. When you are good, one of you will be able to chase away 1,000 of the enemy. But when you are wicked, then a few dozen enemy will kill thousands of you. And that's this. The Chereb is going to chase you. And it says in the Tochacha, V'hayisa mishuga. You'll be going crazy. Mimare einecha asher ra'isa. From that which your eyes have seen. If you get the chance, Rabbi Woolman goes very quickly through the Tochacha. But listen carefully at the end of the summer before Rosh Hashanah. It puts you in the right frame of mind. Because the curses are horrifying if you're listening closely. That's why King Menashe destroyed every Sefer Dvarim he could get his hands on. Because the Tochacha was so awful that he didn't want to even admit that it was possible for that to happen. But when Yoshiyahu, his son, found Chumash Dvarim, the only intact one, Chilkiyahu HaKohen, possibly Yirmiya's father, finding it in the Beis HaMikdash, what was it open to? Parshas Kisavo and the Tochacha. And it says in the Kinnah that we're going to say on Tisha B'Av morning that Yirmiyah sat down and wept and tore his clothing when he saw how close to destruction we were coming. That's the Cherev ad Kalosio sum. I'm not going to destroy all of you, but a very large number, a majority of you are going to die. And if you look after the Holocaust, it was inconceivable that Judaism could come back. 6 million Jews. I said last year in the Eichashir, astonishing statistic, 93% of Lithuanian Jewry was wiped out in the Holocaust. 93%. How is there a family untouched? I mean, my family was very fortunate because we had left 60 years earlier. But in fact, there was at least one relative, some kind of distant cousin of my grandfather's. They went on a European tour in the late 1930s after my grandfather and grandmother Sokolow got married. And they saw cousin Max in Poland. And he refused to leave. He said, it's never going to reach us here. It's just a German war. He was never heard from again. Tezayin ko amar Hashem tzavakos. Thus says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hisbonenu, understand, think about it, Bikiru lamikononos, and call the professional women mourners. Back in the day, if you didn't have enough people to make a scene at the funeral, and enough people to move people to sorrow for the passing of an individual, they would hire professional mourning women who would come and wail and mourn and say kinos and ululate, as we like to say, the skillful women, skillful in mourning. Utavoena, let them come close. Vel hachachamos, to the wise, skillful woman, shilchu v'savona. Send for them and let them come. These are the ones who are not only skillful at touching the heart so we realize what we've lost, but are skilled enough, the Malbim says, to possibly keep the living from dying. They'll save lives. Shifra and Pua, right? Miriam and Yocheved, in the time of the Galus Mitzrayim, they saved Jewish babies. Some of the Mekononos may be able to do that. Yudzayin Usemaherna, and let them make haste, let them hurry. V'sisena alenu nehi, and raise a wailing over us. If you've ever seen, a kid is lost in a gang war or something, people on the news, it's the women relatives who frequently raise up the most wailing and weeping. And sometimes to us unfeeling American Kalta Litvaks, we're like, oh, why are you being so dramatic? But there's something about the heart. A woman who will emote and not be embarrassed about letting out this emotion can bring out the emotion in the onlookers at the funeral and at the Levaya and at the Churban as well. So hurry them and let them raise up a weeping and wailing. The Seiradna Einenu Dima. And once they once they touch our hearts, then we too will watch our eyes drip tears and water. I think somebody could use to mute. And it's not my grandson making noise. I think it's somebody else out there. So if you've got background noise, if you could mute yourself, that would be great. Sorry, noisier share than usual tonight. Esther, I think maybe you need to mute. And let our eyes weep tears. V'afapenu. Thank you. V'afapenu yizlu mayim. And our eyelids will gush with water. Anytime you have a really bad cry, it's all right to cry. I listened to Free to Be You and Me in the early 1970s. Not only that, my mom can tell you, I performed in Free to Be You and Me when I was 5 years old in 1972 in camp. And one of the songs, I think I was in this song, was called It's All Right to Cry. And Roosevelt Greer, the football player, told us it was all right to cry, even if you're a boy. And you know, when you cry really hard, when you're really grief-stricken, your eyes swell up. All of the moisture just becomes too much for your body to take. That's what Yirmiyah is describing in Eicha, and that's what Yirmiyah is describing here. And somehow it's the women who bring this out. Ki kol nehi nishma mitzion, because a sound of wailing is heard from Tzion. Just an endless weeping, where in the middle of the night, the neighbors are like, be quiet, pipe down, why are you being so dramatic? But after the death and the destruction and the terrible Churban, what else can we do? Eich shudadnu, they say. Oh, how we are ruined, how we are lost, how everything is gone. Boshnu ma'od, we are humiliated, we are ashamed, ki azavnu aretz, because we have lost our land, we have left our land. For the last 2 centuries, the Jews have been stereotyped in popular culture, and longer, as the wandering Jews. And the thing about being a wandering Jew, being a homeless person, being a person who does not have a homeland, our generation is lucky enough not to know that, because we've got Eretz Yisrael. And Jews in America believe, falsely in my opinion, that we're safe here and nothing will ever kick us out of America. Unfortunately, history mitigates against that, because every place we ever felt safe, we eventually got kicked out of. Poland lasted 900 years before we were tossed out or murdered along the way. So we've lost our land. Ki hishlichu mishkan hoseinu. They have cast down our Mishkan, Beis HaMikdash, but also Shechuna, our neighborhoods, our dwelling places. Our inhabitants have been thrown out, and they razed, R-A-Z-E-D, everything to the ground. We are told in the Tochacha of Acher Mos Kedoshim, B'chukosai, that if we behave badly, the land will vomit us out. B'taki ha'aretz eschem. The land will spit you out. But the obverse is there too, that if we keep mitzvos, the land won't spit us out. But here the land has spit us out. But it's interesting. We don't take responsibility in Pasuk Yud Ches. There's a wailing, ay, we've lost our land, ay, everything's wrong, woe is me. But do we say that we didn't keep the Torah? No, Hashem says we didn't keep the Torah. So unfortunately, we still don't admit how much at fault we are. And that, of course, is part of the problem. If we don't admit it, we can't do tshuva. And if we don't do tshuva, it's not going to be reversed. Yotes ki shemana noshim dvar Hashem. Listen, O women, to the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Again, the women play a very large role here. And in Eicha, where it's noshim ochlim es piryam, the women who consume their young, the women are being asked to be empathic. I wonder why we're not asking the men to be empathic. Could it be that men aren't as good at this aspect of human mental health as women are? Maybe. But the women are the ones who can get the message across and will feel it if they open their hearts to feel it. We have seen in the Haftorahs already the princesses of Zion being haughty, being uppity, Men too, of course. But the problem is, if even the women close off their hearts from the message, then there's no hope for the Jewish people. I said this when we did Megillas Rus as well. It's the women of Klal Yisrael who have ensured our continuation as a nation and our continued existence and our future and our children. I realize in today's world, gender is a state of mind. But the Torah tells us otherwise. The Tanakh tells us that it's the women who are responsible. And I believe that is why Judaism is dependent on the female parent, not the male parent. If a Jewish man has children with a non-Jewish woman, those children are not Jewish. If a Jewish woman has a relationship, consensual or otherwise, with a non-Jewish man, those children are Jewish. Literally, our Jewishness is determined by our mothers, by the women of Klal Yisrael. Not to mansplain too much, but it's fascinating here. In the Torah, there's euphemisms. Beis Yaakov is women. Klal Yisrael is men. Here it's Shemana Noshim. Listen, women, you're the ones we need. Listen to the word of Hashem. V'sikach oznachem devar piv. Let your ear receive the word of Hashem's mouth. The women are being reached out to because they are our only hope now. V'lameidna v'nosechem nehi. Teach your daughters a lamentation, a nehi. That's why we hire the professional mekononos who are women, and the daughters learn it at their mother's laps, from their mother. The tradition handed down from mother to daughter to mother to daughter, the Tzena Ure'ena, for so many decades, before Sarah Schneerer creates a Jewish girls' educational system. In the modern world, we are committed to a complete and radical gender equality in every way. And as somebody who teaches women's history, I'm not going to speak against equal work for equal pay or for women to be recognized for all of their tremendous accomplishments on a social level, or a woman president, although maybe Hillary wouldn't have been my first choice. But I'm not speaking about that. I'm speaking about the incredible role played by women within the faith that is needed when we are up against it and not going to survive. When we are at the brink of extermination, it's the women who save us. Shifra and Pua, Miriam Hanaviah, Rus, Tamar, Bnos Lot. In unconventional ways, Devorah, women find ways to save us when it's all about to fall completely to pieces. Or in this case, when it already did fall to pieces. All the men folks were no use because we excoriated our own leaders for being terrible leaders and setting a very poor example. Rabbi Tokeyer, in the bulletin that just came out this morning, wrote about the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. And Rabbi Schiffman has been talking about it for, I think, 3 weeks in the Stories of Our Sages. An unbelievable story of a man with a mistaken invitation. You meant to invite Kamsa to your simcha. You invited Bar Kamsa, and then you humiliate him, and then you treat him absolutely lousy, and then he insists on revenge, and a Churban comes, the Churban of Rome, the second Beis HaMikdash, which was never rebuilt yet. Kamsa and Bar Kamsa is an example of the tremendous sinas chinam of the second Beis HaMikdash. All of the figures involved are men. Kamsa, Bar Kamsa, the host, and most important, the Rabbanim, who are destroyed in the Talmud for not stepping up and stopping this when they could have. The failures of men in this Haftorah and in all of the 3 weeks are expressly stated in all of the Nach. Ultimately, finally, too late, we turn to the women and go, help, set us straight. And the women are not faultless either. The women are not blameless. The whole society is a mess. But who runs the justice system in a patriarchal Middle Eastern society? The men. Who are guilty and have blood on their hands? The men. Who aren't supposed to duchen because of the blood on their hands? The men. The men are ultimately more responsible for what goes wrong. And in the Midbar, who refused to build the Egel HaZahav, the women. But the men took their jewelry from them by force to melt it down. Who are the people who didn't listen to the Meraglim? Unfortunately, men and women, but all the Meraglim were men. So this is not a man-hating moment. This is a moment when we say the women have a special place and we need them now. The Isha Re'usa Kina. Each woman should say a dirge, a kina, to her neighbor. The suffering of the women in the Holocaust was unfathomable in so many different ways, just as it was for the men. Terrible, terrible events happening to all Jews. But the mamas kept us going. Very, very important. When Yirmiyahu goes in the kina about Yoshiyahu, and he goes to wail, my favorite kina, Chaf Vav, my favorite kina. That's not usually something you want to say. And I'm also a big fan of B'tzesim Mitzrayim, B'tzesim Yerushalayim, because that's one where even the Ashkis can sing. The Sfardim sing the entire kinot. We only sing the one, but it's a good one. But Chaf Vav, Yirmiyah goes begging for Klal Yisrael to be heard by God, because God isn't listening. And he goes to the Avos, he goes to Maras HaMachpelah, and they make no headway. But then he goes to the Imahos, and the Kina, beautifully, I think it's Rabbi Elazar HaKalir, talks about how Sarah Imenu talks about her son in the Akedah. Rachel and Leah and Rivka saying, we were barren for so long, and are you going to murder our children? Rachel Imenu especially, V'shavu vanim ligvulam. It's the Imahos who are heard by God in the end. This Kina is the chance for the women to save us. So Yirmiyah makes sure that that's in there. And then, a terrible description. Chavki Allah maves b'chalonenu. This one always gets me. Anytime I've learned this Haftorah, this one gets me. Death has climbed up in through our windows. Sometimes death comes in the front door. You see it coming. The person is sick for 6 months or loyalenu longer than that. Death comes in the front door. It's almost an expected guest. But when it comes in through the window, nobody expects it. There was a wonderful man, exactly my age, last year, very tough Levaya, a rabbi who was also a chaplain. He was blind, and he got smicha while losing his sight, an unbelievable person. And one day he just dropped on a corner in Manhattan after he was coming out from seeing the people that he ministered to. It was just all over in a second. It was unexpected. That was a rough Levaya. He was 54. I was 54. It was amazing. What people said about him at the Levaya was amazing, but how do we cope? How do we process? We weren't, none of us were sure. His brothers, his family. How do you process when death comes in the window? Ba ba'armeno senu. It has come into our palaces, our fortified buildings that we thought were safe. We locked all the windows. We locked all the doors. We put up a big fence. Sometimes after a hurricane, the big fence around the compound is still there, but the building is leveled. Lahachris olal michutz. To cut off infants from the streets, or in the streets. Bachurim merachovos. The young men in the squares. The descriptions we saw in Eichel last year. Children usually play in the streets, innocently and safely, one hopes. The young men hang out in the squares with each other, talking big, being young men. We were all young once. But death has come. Daber, Chaf Aleph, speak, Ko Noam Hashem. This is what Hashem has said. V'nafla nivlas ha'adam. The bodies, nevela, the carcasses of human beings will fall. Kidomen al panei hasada. Domen like fertilizer, like dung on the fields. Think about how the bodies were so casually treated after the Holocaust and the burial, the piles of dead there in fields, basically, in the concentration camps. Uche amir me'acharei hakotzer, like piles of sheaves after the reaper. Ve'ein me'asef, and there's none to gather them. We saw this in our own time, slightly before my time, before most of our times. A Holocaust survivor now would be in their 90s probably. We don't remember, but we do remember. When I was a young person, the Holocaust was constantly being brought up and discussed, and movies, and Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av always had major programs about the Holocaust. And here we are today kind of forgetting that and letting it recede into history to the point where to our kids it might as well have been 200, 300, 1,000 years ago, because it was before their time. It was before their century. God forbid they should never know this from the inside. Ko Amar Hashem. So finally, the last pasuk. We need consolation. What consolation can there be? Everything up until the second to last pasuk was horrifying. So God gives you a little tiny bit of something so that we can at least end the Haftorah on some kind of positive note. Ko Amar Hashem, Ayis Halel Chacham B'Chachmaso. Hashem says, the wise man should not be praised for his wisdom, should not brag about being wise. You are given a gift. You are wise. Or you're a Ben Torah and a sage, and you say, I'm smarter than that. I'm keeping the mitzvos. Don't count on it. Don't be overconfident that you're doing everything right. Because we said before, Mi chacham b'yavein ela, who's smart enough to understand this? Nobody. So don't be so sure that you're so smart. Al yishalel hagibor b'gvuraso. Don't praise the strong man for his strength. Don't brag about it. Maybe your strength is a good strength of commitment. Maybe you're a great Jew. Maybe you're somebody who does tremendous feats to get institutions built. Don't get egotistical about it. Don't be so sure. Al yishalel ha'ashir, ashir ba'ashro. And most important of all, the rich man should not brag about his money. That's where ayin hara comes from. The concept of ayin hara is when you draw attention to a special gift that you have. Wisdom. Shlomo HaMelech, I'm the smartest man that ever was. What undid Shlomo HaMelech? Relationships with women who were doing avodah zarah. He was so smart that he couldn't even defend himself against the most basic one of the top 3 commandments. Gilead roya shvichas damim avodah zarah. Not so good at it. You're smart. You're rich. You're strong. Put that aside and keep working. Finally, Chav Gimel ki im bezos yishalel ha-mishalel. The one who is praiseworthy, the one who boasts, should only boast about the following. Haskel v'yodoa osi. Use your seichel, use your understanding, and know me, says Hashem. Ki ani Hashem. Compared to you humans, you mortals, oh, what fools these mortals be, said Shakespeare. Get to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because he is oseh chesed. He performs loving kindness. That's a glimmer of hope. He'll still be kind to us, even after the Holocaust, even after the Churban. Mishpat, he does justice. True justice, not the perverted justice we've been describing for the last 3 days. Utzedakah, and righteousness, ba'aretz, throughout the land, all over the earth. Ki ve'ela chofatzti ne'um Hashem. Because these are the things that I delight in. These are the things I want, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the only 2 psukim, not echatrop in this Haftorah, are these last 2. The prescription. We said there's no bomb in Gilad. How are we going to eventually get past all of this Churban? The answer is, follow HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Understand and know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Do the right thing by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Don't get caught up in your own strengths or weaknesses. Get caught up in tshuva. It's an eye blink between Tisha B'Av and Elul. It always just takes me by surprise. All of a sudden we're blowing shofar and saying L'David Hashem Ori. Just 3 weeks after Tisha B'Av. Less. And so it's a really important thing that we come off this Haftorah to do the right thing. It doesn't say I'm going to save you. It doesn't say I'm going to return you. It doesn't say I'm going to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. On Tisha B'Av morning, we can't hear such things. We're not ready to hear such things. Hashem isn't ready to tell us such things. But we're paving the way for Nachamu if we do it right. And so next week, we will come back together for probably just Sunday, Monday, to leave Tuesday free for the Kingsway program, the movie that's going to be shown. If we don't quite finish, then we'll do a very short one on Tuesday as well.